All right, so describe the style of fighting at the beginning of World War One. Detail the area between the trenches. How these countries involved in World War One try to seek an advantage on the battlefield. So again, a lot like Friday, but since we've been off for some time here, I think it's important to review it, and then we'll move on, talk a little bit about how these countries are going to try to break the stalemate. So there you go. I'll give you some time, work on this. Today is Tuesday. Today is Tuesday. Okay. The 7th. Davis Stronghold did Aaron make it then? Okay. All right. Thank you. All right. So how many miles of trenches were dug throughout Europe? How many miles? We talked about this on Thursday. Austin, 400. Yep, good job. So expanding really from the English Channel all the way down to the Alps. So it's a far ways, far ways. So after what invasion? Germany tried to invade France at the start of this war here. What was that invasion? What was that called? Fall. The Schlieffen plan, yeah, good job. So that was a great plan on paper, but it didn't work out. Now, it didn't, right? No, it didn't. The reason for it is because they underestimated Russia's ability to mobilize. And at the same time, right, Great Britain kind of knew it was coming from miles away, I guess. Right? How did they know that Germany was planning this attack here? How did they know? Parker. Yeah, the telegraph lines, right? Yeah, so communication. So yeah, if you can control communication, then chances are you're gonna have an advantage. So this just goes to show how this war is really the start of this industrial technological warfare. okay, and how these new forms of weaponry and advancements are going to be applied in the battlefield. Just as simple as communication, right? How that has a huge benefit for really these countries in World War I, especially Great Britain. Okay, so they had the connections of this communications, telegraph cables, lines, and with that, this helped them prepare for invasions and prepare for attacks. So Germany, they're going to send out any type of communications. What are they going to have to do? Probably disguise them, right? They're going to have to try to find a way to disguise their communication across these telegraph cables. All right, okay. Good, good, good. So when we're looking at the trenches here, right, how do they dig them? Straight lines? How do they dig them? What?
Like a pattern, so they just get moved out or something.
Yeah, good job. So like zigzags, right? So in case, let's say the opposition jumps in the trench, which we're going to mention more about these weapons today. If they have machine guns or different types of weaponry that can take a lot of people out in one burst, then chances are you want to have breaks in the trenches. You want to have zigzags, right? And that's how they dug. Okay, and again, this stretch all throughout Europe, from the English Channel down the Alps, 400 miles. This is pretty crazy, pretty elaborate digging here. Okay, and with that, right, we have barbed wire that's placed in front of the trenches to try to prepare for, let's say, an invasion. Because barbed wire is a way to try to stop these movements, stop this advancement on the troops and soldiers getting to, obviously, the trench. All right, so behind, like we talked about, we have artillery. So the artillery was focused on, what was that area between? What was that area between? Paul? No man's land. Oh.
You come down and say, come it up.
Yeah, got it off. Look at that. Nice. Not bad, not bad. Yeah, no man's land. Good job, because you don't want to be caught dead there. Okay, so no man's land. You will be killed there if you try to travel across. All right, obviously with the machine gun nest, you have the sniper nest, you have the artillery focus there, and we'll talk more today about chemical warfare and how the use of mustard gas, chlorine gas is focused on no man's land. All right, so when you look at Europe today and you think about some of the environmental impacts and physical impacts of this war, it's still there. You can see some of the land where the trenches were dug through. And if you guys get a chance to look up some of those pictures, pretty neat to see. Over 100 years ago, and those impacts are still there. All right, but for the visuals, okay, towards the end of the video that we watched on Friday, right before the quiz, you could just see the devastation. Right? You could see how the landscape was literally stripped. It was destroyed, and it was a constant barren scene for these soldiers, causing a lot of psychological conditions, right? A lot of PTSD, shell shock for these soldiers to endure. And because it was a defensive war, they were just waiting for their end, right? They're waiting for the opposition to maybe march across no man's land. Or if, let's say, they were given the orders to march across no man's land, you know it's suicide, right? So with a lot of these soldiers, they face the harsh effects of just really waiting it out and just waiting for their death to come. All right, okay. Anything else about trench warfare? We talked about some of the effects, too, that these people faced, okay, with the water that was just kind of building up in the trenches. They didn't have a proper drainage system there, so trench foot was prevalent. There's a lot of signs, examples of that showed you some of the piece in the media newspaper describing about how the soldiers need to keep their feet dry. Right. We also talked a little bit about, well, the waste, right? Where do you go with it? You can't really do too much about it. You just went right where you're standing in the trench. We also talked about the dead bodies that were mounting up, piling up. Not only they had a timeout and had time to bury their friends, their troops, right, their fellow comrades, they just had to make do with what they had. Because if they poked their head up above the trench, chances are they would see it again. Anyway, with the bodies, it would attract rats, right? So we talked about a couple examples of these rats and really how it was brutal for these soldiers waking up and maybe their limbs getting gnawed off by these rats attracted by just a stench of this type of warfare in the trenches. So brutal, brutal stuff. I need to find that picture yet of that one soldier. He just literally made somewhat of like a chamber around him with a barbed wire that you just put over top of him before you go to bed. And it just goes to show really what these soldiers had to face. Yes, just put it all around. No, he had like a little, it looked like a basket around his bed. All right. Yeah, can you imagine that? Just artillery go off, he wakes up. Okay, so I showed you this picture of the trenches and kind of how they looked, making connections back to command centers, back to officers that might have, let's say, a radio to means of communication, telegraph, and to plan their next strategy, plan their next plan, invasion, let's say. And with these trenches, again, any type of movement offensively, you just try to dig around the opposition, right? So with this stalemate that occurs over 4 years long, these countries need to find a new way to try to break that stalemate. And how do they do it? How do they do it? What do you think? With weaponry, right? So with all these new innovations of the Industrial Revolution from the first and second wave, we know that that's going to be applied to the battlefield, right? We're going to watch a video here. One of the quotes, which I think that really hits home. They say, "Oh, World War One started. They rode in on horseback, and they left on an airplane," which is true. Which is true. There's so many advancements here in World War One because this is that first technological war, that first industrial war that changes literally everything. Okay. All right. So I think I went over this slide too. Yet with lack of food, rats, we talked about trench foot, we talked about shell shock already. There's just some images there of what life in the trenches was like. All right, we talked about that slide too with trench foot. All right, finally here. So how to break the gridlock here, how to break that stalemate within Europe for so long, for over 4 years. Well, you need to try to seek an advantage with innovations, with weaponry, okay? And with these European countries, they're both putting a lot of funding, a lot of resources in trying to develop a new measure, a new method of literally killing another person. All right, so with that, poison gas introduced by Germany, okay, moving into World War One towards the middle of the end of the war, they started to use chlorine gas and mustard gas. So yeah, they would focus it on no man's land. So let's say the opposition, in this case the Allied powers, would try to send an invasion across no man's land. Their goal is to try to throw this gas out in the middle to try to stop their advance, to stop their movements. Which, can you imagine that the first time you see this gas, it was like smoke kind of appearing across no man's land. Oh, is that what they have? Is that the big bad weapon? And like, yeah, whatever, let's just march through it. And obviously, you're breathing in chemicals, you're breathing in this type of mist. And with chlorine gas especially, this is filling your lungs with fluid, with liquid, okay, and causing you to really drown from the inside out. So these soldiers have no idea, obviously, the effects of these weapons just yet. And as they're marching through, they quickly realize that was the wrong move to make. And again, with this gas chemical warfare, technically it's outlawed, but still today, this type of warfare is seen. Sad to see, obviously, when it comes to people suffering and facing these types of effects in warfare, obviously, and it's game. But it is brutal. It is brutal. So there's many other effects which, for the assignment for tomorrow, you guys will read a little bit more about chlorine gas and mustard gas, and just really the effects of it. Okay, causing blisters to form, literally, down your esophagus, down your throat, okay, and making it painful to just breathe. Around your eyes, okay, you can't really see. Many people went blind because of the effects of chlorine and mustard gas. So it was brutal. It was brutal. Not only no man's land, but let's say you get to the enemy trench, you just shoot them off. These canisters, these much explosive poison gas in the trenches to try to evacuate and try to push them out. That's why in World War One you see a lot of gas masks, okay? Because this was a new type of weapon, chemical warfare being introduced on the battlefield. Again, very, very harsh effects. All right, obviously machine guns, you know what machine guns are. So automatic fire, okay? And at the time of World War One, it wasn't, let's say, a new form of weaponry, but with the advancements they made with the machine gun, is causing it to be a weapon of choice on the battlefield. So there's many nests, okay, many different types of machine gun posts in the trenches, and you can mow down a lot of troops that are making their way across no man's land with ease. 600 bullets per minute. So these advancements are taking this way. At first, yeah, there's a lot of weapons jamming up or clogging up, and they had to solve those issues. But for the most part, these machine guns will be flying all across the battlefield. So you have heavy machine guns be operated by, let's say, a tripod, and then you have another soldier, as you can see here in the third picture in, Okay, they have gas masks on, but at the same time, you have someone feeding the bullets, making sure that it doesn't jam. Flamethrowers. So in World War I, flamethrowers isn't what you think of, let's say World War II. It's not like they're walking around with a backpack on and they have just kind of a gun that shoots the flame, shoots the petroleum into the bunker or the trench. In World War I, it was a lot heavier. It was a lot. It was a lot different. And they actually had 5, 6, maybe even 7 people operating one flamethrower. Okay. Towards the end of the war, it changed a little bit, but at the start of it, okay, they would have several men holding the hose, one person holding the nozzle where the flame would shoot out, and you have a couple people actually pull along a wagon where obviously that fuel is. So this is a very slow operating weapon at the start of the war. And one way to try to end this before it gets started, you aim for the tank, right? And if you hit that tank, look out. So anyway, with the flame, this was a way to try to evacuate bunkers, evacuate trenches, and the soldiers would really burn alive. Let me go through this real quick. Okay. All right. So artillery. We already talked about artillery. How it was focused behind the trenches, constantly aimed on no man's land. You have these literally these explosives launching from miles away, okay, causing a devastation to not only the enemy, but even your own troops, because there it is launching over your head day in and day out, causing a shell shock, causing PTSD for a lot of soldiers. Can't sleep when this shelling is constantly going off. All right, tanks and armored cars. So tanks introduced by Great Britain to try to break gridlock. Again, it's not what you think of World War II tanks or modern style tanks. This is what it looked like here, the far right picture. Okay, we operated on tracks. Okay, and it was a way to try to be used as a battering ram. So these tanks would literally drive across no man's land and have soldiers behind the tank, using it as literally a shield, as a battering ram against the opponent's trench. So it would mow through any type of barbed wire, right? It would literally just crash into the enemy trench, and you have the soldiers behind it, really funneling into the trench. Okay. So yeah, it's not what you think of in World War II, but in World War I, this was used more as a pretty much a global shield, a battering ram to get into the enemy trench. They were not great when it came to mobility. A lot of times they would just break down because they didn't have the means of propelling this type of armored vehicle just yet. But towards the end of the war, these tanks were used pretty heavy, okay, by Great Britain. They disguised it, the way it got its name, the tank, is because they disguised it as water tanks coming over. And it was a way to try to make the Germans think that it was just water coming over in these tanks. But no, in reality, it was this huge armored vehicle. All right, submarines. We already talked about U-boats. Okay, I mentioned about now already with that naval arms race between Germany and Great Britain, and how Germany was trying to look for an advantage out in the open water to try to take out any type of supplies and materials coming from the United States over to the Allied powers. So if they can cut off the resources and materials coming in, well, you're going to choke off the enemy eventually, right? Great Britain's an island. They're limited to what resources they have. They realize if they can have an economic warfare with them, that might actually pull them out of the war. And finally, airplanes. So on the far left here, that's what the airplanes towards the end of the war would look like. Okay, so with the first flight, which is really more like a glide, this happens in the early 1900s in the United States. But quickly, just 10 years later, at the start of World War I, these airplanes are starting to look like you see them today. And they have speeds of up to 100, 150 miles per hour, and flying different types of weaponry on these airplanes. Who knows? Maybe at the end of this chapter, we'll watch a movie, which I think. Fly Boys, James Franco. No? You guys ever hear of it? Good, good. Okay, we'll watch it. All right, so anyway, with Fly Boys, it is somewhat accurate. A lot of it is maybe just fabricated for cinema, but at the same time, these airplanes were used extensively for different types of reconnaissance, right on the battlefield to see maybe enemy movements, and just taking down different types of zeppelins that were used to maybe bomb the enemy trench or some manufacturing in Europe. So with these airplanes, they were used towards the end of the war, and again, really picking up speed when it comes to their innovations. totally changed literally in 10 years. It just happened first. I only applied to being used on the battlefield. And that's why World War I, when it comes to these conflicts, we see so much advancement so quick because they have to be applied to the battlefield, right? They have to be applied to seek the advantage for, let's say, the country to win. All right, here's a look at the flamethrower. Sorry about that. So you can kind of see that here, right? You have several men operating a flamethrower, and I don't know. I wouldn't be the one. I wouldn't want to be the one operating a flamethrower like that. I think that's kind of suicide, right? Walking across no man's land with 5, 6, 7 guys trying to operate this flamethrower. Yes, Chris.
So, their method is tanks. Why don't they just do something similar? Take 2 strong guys, you can carry it across no man's land. Like carry a big shield of metal.
Oh, okay.
And then, that's not gonna stall out the normal tanks do. And when they get into the first trench, they go to one side and just
Go to town.
The other side.
Oh,
And then
okay.
I guess the opposing side's best method is you artillery above,
Yeah.
and then you lose part of the trench.
Oh. I like your thought there. I like your thought, but I don't know if there's heavy machine gun fire on a shield, even a shield like that, it's probably gonna mow him down his back. Right? I don't care how strong this guy is. Eventually, that's gonna be too much force for him to hold up. But yeah, I like what you're saying. What?
The question I was gonna ask earlier was,
Okay.
was the flamethrower hot?
Oh, it was hot.
No, I meant like,
Jeez.
like the hose and stuff, when they were. Okay, it was, okay, the question was funnier earlier whenever we were talking about the flamethrower. And like we were talking about burning people and asked if it was hot.
So the flame was only on the very end. So the flame's at the very end.
Yeah,
of the
it's like a tiny flame. And
Yes, yeah, so like the trolling that would shoot out, and the source of energy. It would just be holding up, it wouldn't be.
And I've seen a lot.
But sometimes it'll just kick back in, and blow up.
I've seen.
That'd be terrible, huh? All right, okay, is there any questions here? Any questions? So tomorrow, listen up, tomorrow, we'll review some of these weapons of warfare, and then I have an activity for you. We're gonna do some research, and you're gonna find other forms of weaponry that maybe we didn't mention that we didn't talk about. Okay, yeah, I like that, I
I was
like that.
thinking shotgun.
Nope, Connor already took it. Don't wanna hear it. Nah.
Nah.
Hey, sit down, got a video for you. Please pay attention.
Stand up.